Many of us take it for granted that when we pick up a prescription, the medication has already been proven safe and effective. But how is that actually determined before it ever reaches a human patient? What kinds of testing, what kinds of models decide what's considered safe to consume? This is Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. On this episode, Mackensey Alexander joins the conversation to explore the intersection of ethics, science, and public health, and why the future of research may depend on moving beyond animal models.
Welcome to another episode of Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Mackensey Alexander, who is a law student at Lewis and Clark Law School and an animal advocate working to end the use of animals in biomedical research. Mackensey, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining. If there were one thing that you wanted to impart with our audience and make sure that they don't miss on this show today, what would that be?
I really want people to understand that shifting away from animal models in biomedical research, it's not just about the ethics. It's also about getting to a point in science where we are actually reflecting what humans need rather than approximating it in a different model.
Wow, that's important to get across to our audience. I think that's a view that's not held largely by the public who's outside of this space. It sounds like, if I can summarize, there are really two completely separate, solid arguments for moving away from animal testing. There's the ethical argument and the science argument that are completely separate, but joining them together, it's a really strong argument. And it sounds really hard to continue to justify using animals in research. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been using animals in research for over 2,000 years, dating back to the 4th century BC when Aristotle was trying to understand anatomy. And animals have absolutely been helpful in research, but we have never been able to quite mimic the exact human anatomy in these animal models. And so now that we've got NAMs, which are new approach methods, we don't need to be using animals any longer. And the transition away from the animal model is actually much more within reach than people really understand or know yet.
Yeah, the historical aspect, I think, is very good to start to frame it in terms of it was useful 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but less so now. We've learned so much more about the complexity of human biology and what works and what doesn't. And even amongst two humans, it's different the way things work. But as we've learned, because something has been done in the past, does not mean that that's the way to do it going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And you said there are two separate arguments, the ethics argument and the science argument. And I think for people who are taking the ethics approach, they're having a hard time getting across to people that there's not just two options, those options being we use animal models or we stop studying biology. That's not what's happening here. The ethics argument absolutely is implicit in the science argument as well. They are working hand in hand. But what I've noticed is the science argument resonates a lot more with the public because people are obviously concerned about public health. People are concerned about ameliorating human suffering, as they should be. It's completely understandable. However, I think the public doesn't really understand yet these new technologies that are available to us. The NAMs, as I've been saying, the new approach methods, which involve organoids, brain on a chip, lung on a chip, intestine on a chip, in silico model. There's obviously also human research as well. We have so many new tools available to us now that it's not just we stop using animals, so we stop studying biology and science. And I really hope that people will understand that soon.
I hope they will too. It's presented sometimes, the narrative is presented as a false choice. If you were to stop animal research today or tomorrow or next year, that doesn't mean that the progress in medicine has to stop. In fact, it could accelerate with these new approach methodologies. Technology exists for some of them, and if enough investment is put into it, perhaps for many of them, you could learn so much more information so much more quickly by using these technologies. So, do you want to share something about any of the NAMs that you found particularly interesting or useful, or something that maybe our listeners could get a handle on without a science background to show off kind of how useful they can be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the organoids, I'll start there. Those are actually derived from human tissue. So you can have like a liver tissue organoid, a heart tissue organoid, a brain tissue organoid. And what that means is essentially you are able to study just that specific tissue from a human being. And with that, you are not subjecting animals to testing. Obviously, you're able to do a bunch of experiments and further diagnoses, further treatments without subjecting people to experiments and animals to experiments as well. The organoid model is really promising, and people have started to make multi-system organoids. So one of the critiques about the organoid has been, oh, well, we can only study this one specific function, when in reality, diseases and things of this sort, they're multi-system affecting, right? And so we need to be able to have a multi-system organoid in order to accurately study these given diseases. And so that is actually in the process. And then there are the in silico models, which are basically computational simulations. The most common way that in silico model is being used right now is how drugs are metabolized in proteins. Again, we are not subjecting any live entity to experimentation with the in silico model. Obviously, it uses pre-existing data to predict the success rate of given experiments based off of past failures, past successes. The other one is organ on a chip. So that can be brain on a chip. Like I said before, you can just list them off. Liver on a chip, intestine on a chip. And that one is a microphysiological system that is put onto a tiny disc. That one does seem to be a bit more advanced than the singular system organoid.
That's a great summary of some of these so-called NAMs, or novel alternative methods or non-animal methodologies. And one of their many major advantages is bypassing what's been a limitation of animal testing for some time. And that's what we call the lack of translatability, which means if you study something in a human, you're going to have human relevant results. If a drug causes liver damage in the population that you're testing, you can be pretty sure if you expand it to a bigger population, it's going to continue to cause liver damage. In the animal model, that may or may not be the case. There's numerous examples going throughout the decades of it going both ways, of a drug being effective, for example, in curing cancer in an animal, and failing miserably in humans, or having unintended or unexpected side effects in humans that weren't even observed in the animal model. And similarly, something may be tested in animals or one species, for example, and be shown to be not effective and get tossed aside, when the reality is, what if it is effective? What if there's enough differences between the species that you're discarding it because there's some critical enzyme that's missing, or one gene that's turned on that shouldn't be, or that's not, or one gene that's not turned on that should? There's this horrible lack of translatability that exists in every single animal model. And that's why routinely we have drugs that fail that look promising in animals, and unexpected side effects that don't show up in the animal models, and people suffer as a result, and treatments get delayed. So what Mackensey is describing is that you can create like a mini liver, a human liver, a mini intestine, a mini lung. For the lung example, you can get it down to the cellular level. It's called the alveolus, which is the interaction of the blood passes by, and alveolus gets rid of what it inhales, its waste, and basically takes in from the blood what it needs, mostly oxygen. And so this can be tested in a model, because you have these what's called microfluidics which is part of this microphysiologic system which mimics blood flow. And so you get this human relevance without even having to entertain the idea of experimenting on an animal and raising any ethical issues with it. And you don't suffer from that lack of translatability. If it works on human lung tissue, there's no reason it shouldn't work on an actual human lung. So it's enormous benefits of these evolving models. And that's just one example. I wanted to go into a little bit further detail that it's present now. We have labs working on it, and it has the potential and can provide more meaningful information without the time lost and without the ethical questions raised with experimenting on animals.
Yes, absolutely. The transferability problem is massive when it comes to NHPs or non-human primates. In research, there's about a 90% failure rate in translation to humans in all studies. That's why NAMs are so important, because they do have that high translation rate. It's starting off of human tissue. It's like I said in the very beginning, we are not just approximating what a human goes through when they have set disease. We are actually studying it directly. All of the NAMs that I've listed previously are currently moving us along, progressing us in science. They're not like a thing of the future that we have just conceptualized and imagined. They're actually being put to work right now. For instance, like the organoids are being used in Zika research. The lung on a chip was used heavily for COVID-19 research and vaccinations, cystic fibrosis studies. One of the most successful uses of organoids today is actually cancer research, where people are making tumor organoids to test drugs before doing any sort of treatment on human beings. So currently, these NAMs are actually very successful.
So I want to paint a picture a little bit of creating a tumor organoid, for example. So you've got a tumor, it's a human tumor, and you can run this equivalent of blood flow through it with your agent suspected to work on it, for example. And you can visibly see if it shrinks. You can take samples of the tissue to see if you're finding the effects that you expect to see of the cells, the tumor cells dying. Now, if you want to study in animals, you have to give that animal cancer first, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you have to inject your therapies into it, subjecting the animal to side effects, which you may know in advance, which are often unpleasant for chemotherapeutic agents. And then you have options, and it depends on the study. The animal can be scanned to look at the size of the tumor, if it's shrinking, biopsy, see if it's present. But sometimes the animals just get killed. They'll say, let's just open it up and see what we found. And that can be done over a long time period, putting the animal under a lot of pain and killing it prematurely to find a result that might not even be valid, as is much more likely than not the case when studying cancer in animals. Or you can have a direct organoid, human-based material and study it directly. If you're a listener and you have a family member who's had cancer, or maybe you've had cancer, which one of those ways sounds like the better way to go about getting a medication to you? The NAMs provide something that's more rapid. It gets into the hands of provider more quickly, and the results are much more likely to be valid. You should be rooting for that, not sticking with studying it in monkeys or just non-human primates in general, who we can cure cancer in for numerous kinds, but it fails repeatedly in humans. And perhaps you're getting an understanding of why listening to this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention, NAMs are significantly cheaper. There was a report published by PETA recently about how much taxpayers' money goes to animal models, animal model testing, and biomedical research. So I believe that the NIH has about a $40 billion budget per year. And about 50% of that goes to animal model testing. It turns out that about $23 billion of taxpayers' money is going to animal models every single year. If the ethics aren't enough to convince you, if the better science isn't enough to convince you, The money aspect is absolutely gigantic. We are spending so much money on these animal models, and for what? The translation is less than 10%. Your loved ones are not getting the care that they deserve and the time that they need it. The NAMs are so much quicker. They're so much more efficient than animal models, which are really just a thing of the past at this point. And we're using rhesus macaques, the most common non-human primate model. About 35% of animal testing is on rhesus macaques, and they've got a 90 to 93% sequence homology with human beings, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. There is so much room for difference in that 7% DNA. It's a lot of money for a very, very slim chance of success.
Yeah, thanks for bringing the financial argument into that. As a taxpayer, you should be demanding more for how your tax dollars are being invested. Our government, your lawmakers have a responsibility to listen to their constituents. And if this is something that strikes home with you, you can look into it a little bit on your own and contact your lawmaker. There's a push going on right now for moving away from animal testing to these NAMs, and your lawmakers might want to hear from you if this is important. Let's spend your tax dollars more wisely for you and the greater good to get medications more quickly and more cost effectively into the hands of healthcare providers sooner to get these cutting edge treatments to treat patients.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we just add another dimension, which we haven't talked about until now: ethical reasons to move away from animal testing, scientific reasons, and now there's the monetary reasons and time. Pick whatever argument resonates with you the most. Pick one. And that's what you can think about. You can research on your own. You can speak with your friends, share it, and advocate for your government, for our government to act in the interest of the public for human medicine. That's one of the NIH, National Institutes of Health mandates. That's what they're there for. And they're slowly coming around to it to realize that relying on animal data is the past and comes with ethical complications and questions as well. And so they're starting to move to the future. Let them know that you want them to get there as quickly as possible.
There's other bills happening in Washington right now about getting UW defunded. Their primate center is up for another grant from the NIH this summer, and it'll be a momentous moment if UW's primate center gets rejected for their grant from the NIH, because UW Primate Center is one of the 7 that is federally funded in the United States right now. It is significantly smaller than the one in Oregon, which houses 5,000 monkeys, but UW still houses about 1,000 monkeys. So there are a lot of things happening right now trying to transition away from animals in labs, and it's really exciting.
So these centers, the 7 centers that still hold monkeys in them for research, are funded by taxpayer dollars. They're funded through the NIH. And Mackensey brings up the fact that this grant is up for renewal. This could be a big moment if our government is going to do what they say in terms of we're moving away from it. Maybe it's time to pull that funding. Maybe it's time to cut it in half, or not just rubber stamp it and say status quo is good. And this is another time to make your voice heard, especially if you're in the state of Washington, but if you're anywhere, because it involves everyone's taxpayer dollars. These centers are funded by the public. And that is something that I feel like sometimes gets lost in the discussion. Like Mackensey, I was at a recent hearing at at our local, we have a local primate center here in Oregon in the Portland area, and the board was trying to decide if they were going to move in the direction of stopping research or continue it. And amongst the discussion I heard was that we should not let politics get involved in medicine. And that just represents a very, very poor understanding of the process. It's not letting politics get involved. It's letting the people who pay the bills get involved, which we have every right to do. These are public funded institutions. If the public continues to say this is okay, then we have no argument to say that we need to shut these down. But that's clearly not the case. It's clearly not the case. And so that's an important issue related to the money. The public has a voice. If you think that it's unethical, as we've been talking about, if you think that it's flawed science, which it is, if you think there's a faster and cheaper way, this is your chance to speak up, ask your lawmaker to say, no, we're not going to fund. We don't want to fund this UW lab anymore. Just like here in Portland, Oregon, there's a large group of people saying, no, we don't want to fund this anymore, and asking our lawmakers to support shutting down the funding because there are more ethical ways to do research.
We are seeing a shift away, not just with our political campaigns, not just with who is in office right now. We are seeing a shift away with the public value of non-human primates. Again, this is back to the ethics discussion of it. I just really hope that UW follows along because, like I said, it's time. It's time to transition away from these. We need to stop wasting taxpayers' money. We need to get better results for humans, ameliorating human suffering from uniquely human cognitive disorders. We can't continue to study uniquely human cognitive disorders like autism spectrum disorder, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, in primates that don't naturally get these disorders.
There's people in Hollywood and actors and influencers and musicians and athletes and people who are extremely well known who are dying young of cancer. While the causes of a lot of that, why we're seeing it more so in younger people, are not well known. And that's a very small part of the NIH's budget looking into why this is occurring. We're studying these diseases in the wrong area. And the neurodegenerative diseases is one of the ones you mentioned. An actor just recently, a young guy without this disease would probably have many years to live. And how many years have we been studying animal models for ALS? Decades, if not longer. We don't understand all of the pathophysiology as why it happens in humans. So why would we think that creating it in an animal where it doesn't exist, or in the rare circumstance, if you do find it, you're going to get anything useful? It's not surprising that we have these diseases that we have no treatments for, or horrible treatments like Alzheimer's, which have close to 100% failure rate in animals, not surprisingly. But and now that I primed you, maybe you'll think of some other actors or influencers or musicians that are passing away. Toby Keith is another one. It's been a few years. Very popular country musician. I think he had stomach cancer or esophageal cancer. It's very hard to treat. Are there animal models that successfully treat it? Probably. There are treatments on the market, but these people who have access to the medications and the best that they can get, we're failing them. And we're failing. These are just a couple of examples. There are people suffering every day, not in the spotlight, while money is being spent and time is being wasted on models that are likely to fail.
Yep, we're relying on a broken system, essentially, especially with the neurological conditions that are unique to human beings. We are genetically altering these non-human primates to try to mimic whatever mutation.
They introduced this particular gene which induces these symptoms, which wouldn't otherwise be there. And then the goal is to study the behaviors and come up with a treatment. Is that the ultimate plan?
Yeah, so it's kind of a shot in the dark, especially with autism spectrum disorder. It's just one of those diseases that really makes me mad that we're using non-human primates, because we don't even know how to detect it well in little girls, for instance. It is so much harder to diagnose young girls than it is to diagnose young boys. And so there are so many women who into their late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s are finding out, oh my gosh, I've had autism my whole life. And doctors just weren't able to diagnose me because it's so hard to pinpoint in women. And so you change that into a non-human primate. What are you looking for? What are you looking for exactly? And, the goal of these autism spectrum disorder studies is to increase accuracy of diagnoses and better treatments for people. However, as autism is a massive spectrum, if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. You cannot pull out any assumptions or make any conclusive statements about what autism is when you've just seen it one time. And so these scientists are implementing this gene mutation basically in rhesus macaques and studying them to see, hey, are there commonalities in behavioral changes? Are these monkeys able to interact normally from their control counterparts? It is such a massive problem in neurobehavioral studies using non-human primates because the researchers cannot reliably tell if the changed behavior they are witnessing is due to the genotypic alteration or if it's due to the monkeys being just stressed and sad and they're in an environment that they're not used to and they're not able to interact the way that they need to. I mean, monkeys have incredibly flowing social lives. They are very social beings. And so when you take that away from them, which is a basic need, you just can't reliably deduce that what you're observing is from the alteration that you've done. So it's pretty disappointing.
And that's a flaw in the research design then, which impacts its validity of any conclusions you're going to draw. I mean, the researchers should know that before doing the study. Everything you just said. The department funding the research hopefully has someone smart enough on that decision board to see that as well. So how is the researcher of good faith going to run this study? And how is the presumably NIH individual reviewing it say, yes, this has a chance of producing valid results? It feels like there's a breakdown on both sides of the system. And you can perhaps tell me if I'm wrong, but how many years has this research been going on for? And how many times has it been funded and funded and funded again?
We've been studying autism spectrum disorder for a long time, decades and decades. But I'm really glad that you brought up the regulatory aspect of this. How are researchers in good faith justifying these decisions? And part of the Animal Welfare Act, passed back in the 60s, is that any research institution that is performing animal testing has to have something called an IACUC, which is an Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, which basically functions as an oversight regulating body that inspects the laboratory and checks to make sure that the monkeys are being quote unquote humanely treated. However, that sounds really good, but unfortunately, many IACUCs are corrupt and they are self-governing and they choose their own researchers to be on the board, which means that they are incentivized to okay the experiments that are going on. And so what that means is that the welfare of the animals in these labs is absolutely not the priority. The priority for these researchers who are doubling as ethicists in a way is to continue their research. And there have been so many problems with IACUCs in the past. And one that I can talk specifically about is UWs, which right now
University of Washington, right? For our listeners, that's the University of Washington.
Yes, sorry, the University of Washington. They're in trouble right now because they don't even have a non-affiliated member. They don't even have an ethicist.
Which is mandated in the AWA, correct?
Exactly. Both of those positions are absolutely mandated on the IACUC board. UW, you can't even attend their meetings. Their meeting minutes are not available to the public. They don't let you know who the members actually are. We don't know what their names are. There are a few grassroots organizations who have tried to pressure them to release that information so that we understand. The public deserves to understand how, again, its tax dollars are being used and how we are regulating this animal experimentation. And with the humane treatment of these animals comes the translatability problem, right? So it's all connected. And the basis of it is we are spending our money in an ineffective, inefficient way.
Yes. And it sounds like UW is going to great lengths to conceal what's really happening. Whereas, as we talked about just a little bit ago, the public is paying the bills. There should be no hesitation to reveal it. Public scrutiny is part of the process. Maybe this is a time for people to speak up and say, all right, we stop funding now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the time to speak up and say, we are not funding this anymore. We want our voices to be heard. Otherwise, next year, 23 billion of your dollars will again go to science that is not working.
And that money could be used instead, spent on science, which is going to work, is going to be human relevant research and not experimenting on animals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mackensey, thanks for bringing all that up. There's so much going on in this space right now. There's some momentum in our government. I think you've learned many things so far. You've learned of the deception going on. It's the hidden nature of this and the narrative which is out there in terms of we have to have this animal research. We need it. It's critical. And it's not. We have better methods. And every dollar that we spend, every week that we waste on models that are flawed from the beginning and not yielding positive results, that's time and money lost that you can't get back. There are diseases in the public eye, many of them these neurodegenerative diseases. We don't have great treatments for them. Some we don't have any, including the autism spectrum disorder, which we have treatments for, but it continues to grow as a public health problem because there are so many people being diagnosed with it. And it's difficult to treat when you know that's the diagnosis. As Mackensey pointed out, it's sometimes even difficult to diagnose. And we need better models than what we have. It's been studied for decades in the wrong model. That's so important to understand. And I think something Mackensey would agree with. We've got the wrong model. Why are we going to continue to fund it? And the autism spectrum disorder is one example that can be expanded out. Imagine that in almost every single disease we're looking at the wrong model. How are we going to get valid results? The validity, it's not translatable. The results don't mean very much for humans. We have validated skin models, for example, and eye models, and cosmetics testing is largely accepted to not need animal models anymore. There's a class of drugs called monoclonal antibodies, which the FDA is moving away from using animals at all in those anymore. The more we learn, the more we see that experimenting on animals costs us so much. Doesn't just cost the animals who are suffering day in, day out. It costs us, the public, those who have diseases and have family members who have diseases that are not getting optimally treated because we're lacking medicines for them. We're lacking good medicines. We can't go back and undo the past. As we talked about briefly, we do have a lot of therapies now, which are a result of animal testing. We have learned a lot from animal testing in the past. That's not a justification for going forward with that. Just as you can ride a horse to work if you want. Horses used to be the main method of transportation, but they got replaced with something that's, I think everyone would agree, is better. And I defy you to find someone riding a horse to work. Animal research is like the horse in today's transportation world. And there's so many good reasons to abandon it and spend our money in getting medicines to the hands of healthcare providers more quickly that are going to be safer, have a higher chance of working, lower risk of toxicity, and saving animals from all the suffering, which just takes the ethical discussion completely out of the equation. Mac, this was a great discussion. Thanks so much. Is there anything you'd like to close with before we go?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me on today. I'm really happy to be here and talking about this issue I am so passionate about. I mean, it's going to be my whole career. So thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure, Mac. Thank you again.